Friends, if you kindly take your seats, we want to begin right away because we are already 25 minutes behind time. And if we delay too much, then we will be cutting short into our the lunch hour. Let me begin by thanking the organizers of South Asia Economic Summit for putting this discussion on post-2015 development agenda on the schedule of the South Asia Economic Summit. I believe that this is a very timely, very important theme for a discussion at the South Asia level. We recently had in August an ESCAP, SAARC Secretariat, ADB, UNDP consultation on this very same theme, and for 3 days we discussed. In fact, Ravi Shankar Senju was leading the Nepalese delegation in that consultation, and there were many others. Some of them are here in this audience also. So I think it's a very important and very engaging discussion that is going on in the United Nations General Assembly at this moment. And I'm very happy that also Mr. Tanmay Lal is here, who coordinates India's position on these issues from the Government of India. The discussion and the United Nations what is happening now is about the successor framework to Millennium Development Goals, which will reach their limit next year at the end of 2015, as you know. And I don't need to remind this audience that when the leaders of 192 countries adopted the Millennium Declaration in 2000, United Nations General Assembly in year 2000, at the turn of the century, it was a very historic turning point. It put for the first time human development on the agenda of government action. And before that, governments measured the development in terms of GDP growth. And now human development was a sort of numeraire, if you like, or an indicator of development. And that helped in shaping development policy all across the world. The peer pressure was built on governments, and you know that because of all that process, millions of people around the world, especially around developing countries, are having better life, better well-being, and it has delivered quite a lot, but it remains to be an unfinished agenda. This is what comes out of many reports on MDGs, including the Asia Pacific MDG report produced jointly by ESCAP, ADB, and UNDP, and the latest one was also discussed in Nagarkot, the discussion that we have had in August. So it remains an unfinished agenda. Of course, we still have a little more than a year to achieve some more, and so while we have that time, we should do everything to achieve more of the goals and whatever gaps we can cover. But the discussion of the new development agenda, which will engage the governments and people over the next 15 years, is very, very important. And in that discussion, South Asia's voice needs to be heard, because as you know, with 25% of world's population, but over 40% of world's poverty, there is no way world can achieve any development goals if South Asia fails to achieve that. So world has a stake in this discussion, that what South Asia is thinking about it, and should factor that in. So that is, I think, the criticality of a discussion on post-2015 development agenda in South Asia. And South Asia's voice should be fully factored in. Now, I think just to get started, we have a very eminent panel here, and just to get started, I want to put on the table that there are three classes of issues that need to get into this agenda. One is the unfinished business of MDGs, and a lot has been achieved, a lot has to be achieved, but even at the best of the times, even in the best of the performance, MDGs strive to achieve only 50% of the challenges. Say reduce poverty by 50%, reduce hunger by 50%. So the other 50% anyway remains to be done. So the unfinished business of MDGs is one set of issues, and there are countries which have done very well. There are countries which have lagged behind. There are variations across indicators and goals and all that. So one set of issues close the gap completely and leave no one behind. The second class of issues is the issues which were not somehow included or which did not find a place in the MDGs when we were doing that, but they were very critical. Issues have been raised in this very forum also, the centrality of growth, centrality of employment creating growth, and reducing inequalities, which was the point which was raised in this previous discussion. And also there was a global partnership for development, but it was not very precisely defined, so very little was achieved in terms of providing technology, finance, and other resources for development. And the third set of issues is issues which have surfaced and have become important since the MDGs were drafted. And these are issues relating to the ecological and environmental concerns, which have become very prominent now. So I think if we keep this broad classification, and this is, by the way, coming out in the open working group's recommendations, which were tabled in July this year, and they have precisely tried to cover these three classes of issues in the 17 goals that was referred to earlier, and 169 targets. So I won't take any more of your time, because we have a very eminent panel with us, and we will begin with a special address by Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General of our host RIS, and my very old colleague and friend, and then a lead presentation by Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya, who is now Distinguished Fellow at the Center for Policy Dialogue and Chair of Southern Voice on Post-MDGs Network, and a very important voice on the development issues, especially from LDCs. He has been championing the cause of LDCs in this whole discussion on development agenda. And then we have four panelists, all very eminent ones, including Mr. Tanmay Lal, who is Joint Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs and who coordinates India's position in these negotiations, Mr. Ravi Shankar Senju, on my left, who, as I said, is dealing with these issues in National Planning Commission in Nepal, Dr. Alia Khan, who is Dean of Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad, and Dr. Manmohan Agarwal, who is also associated with the RIS but has been a professor at JNU and a number of other universities. So with that, I want to turn to this very eminent panel and give the floor to Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi. So you 10 minutes? Yeah. Okay.
I would finish it in 10 minutes. As you rightly said, there are three set of issues which have come up. Number one, as you said, are the issues where things haven't moved further. And I think further to that, and we should not forget the whole issue of ownership that was associated with MDGs. The point that things haven't been accomplished, I think, also bears to this fact that some of these goals were completely alien to the kind of regime that we had at the time these goals were adopted, and the kind of government commitment that could be attached with them. Now, with the post-2015 agenda, that's the kind of distinction I am seeing now, way more and more engagement and the UNDP effort in terms of broadening the deliberations that are to take place with the adoption of these goals, I think localizing the kind of context that is gaining some sort of importance in this. How far we go in terms of what actually is adopted is extremely important. This report that we saw some time back, The Future We Want, I think has laid out some very important points which are sort of setting the agenda for the kind of sustainable development goals that we are talking of. The whole effort, as you very rightly pointed out, is now in terms of poverty eradication. And that has assumed the key significance in terms of the new agenda and the kind of issues that we are trying to address. This poverty eradication agenda, that's what the Future We Want report describes, is the biggest impediment in terms of we addressing the whole issue of sustainable development. It is also assuming importance because of the fact that we had n number of commitments. In this slide I have tried to capture as many as I could put on one slide, but there are several important landmark sort of global understandings that we had, whether it was Rio Declaration, Agenda 21, or even Monterey Consensus for Financial sort of Coordination, Doha Declaration on Financing for Development, and the Istanbul Program. Every way we have been talking about issues, whether we list them as a post-2015 development agenda or we try to raise them at other points, it's important that we bring them in this kind of overarching framework. But important, as Professor Rahman Subhan just mentioned in the previous session, the action has to be at the national level. There is no shortcut to that. There is no remedy for that kind of action. And it's extremely important that the member countries within the region get together in terms of regional cooperation, of course, but they would have to have national strategies in terms of addressing these challenges. In the previous session, mention was made that there are 17 SDGs that are there. I haven't thought of listing them here, but several UN reports are giving full details and the kind of indicators that are being associated with these 17. The important debate that's taking place right now is in terms of financing of the goals. If you recall, MDG 8 had sort of everyone brushes it aside as a failure, but I think financing is extremely crucial. Somehow in the MDG we couldn't pay enough attention, and now with the emergence of the South, emergence of the couple of countries from South, if I may say so, there is greater focus on who would finance it. And there are efforts going on to transfer responsibilities to some select countries, engage them in dialogue and pass on the responsibilities. So that's where we would have to be extremely careful. Not that one wants to shrug off the responsibility, but I think it's extremely important that we address it. Issue here really is how to mobilize financing according to national priorities, how to ensure policy space that is necessary to implement effective national sustainable development strategies, what all that may entail. Global trading and investment that are deemed fair to all countries. That's the kind of broad goal we have. And we know there are issues coming up with the southern institutions. BRICS Bank is the first southern financial initiative to provide sort of space for market. But if we do not bring in again the endogeneity element in these institutions, then we may lose out on the larger narrative that South is trying to set. The third important dimension is the adequate capitalization of existing funds, simplification and harmonization of rules for international public funds, and more important is commitment for financing these goals. So how to reduce global financial fragility that we are seeing at this point, as global economies is still grappling with the recessionary tendencies. In a week from now, we would have the G20 meeting at Brisbane. some issues of this kind are likely to come up for discussion. RIS last week organized a major meeting with our Sherpa on G20, and the issue that came up was that India has some agenda in terms of restructuring of global financial institutions. I think it's extremely important that a meeting or a grouping like this should also address what institutional frameworks like G20 can really address. And that's where I think institutions like we were discussing this morning with our colleague from SDF, it's extremely important how the SAARC Development Fund is going to provide that kind of space. As of now, some way low-key, but how to bring that at the center stage in terms of a vehicle to achieve post-MDG related issues. There is also a related issue of declining quantums of aid to not only to this region but also globally. And that is again an important dimension in terms of 0.7 target, for which we have been pressing all this while. Fortunately, DFID stands out in terms of their target to be accomplished by end of 2015. OSED has also promised, but there are several who are still missing from the scene. UN's ESCAP study on aid for trade has come up with a couple of observations. I was just thinking that we need to be a little more forceful in terms of how some of the donor agencies are really changing the brackets and not enhancing the quantums that are of a key significance for enhancing the infrastructure building for trade. And I would just like to pick up for a minute this issue which we discussed in the previous session on policy coherence. Policy coherence is extremely important when we talk of MDGs or post-MDG development agenda. Why we see that the subsidy regime is not getting addressed. If we think of making high-level claims at the UN meetings and we continue to dump agriculture produce from countries, from the DAC members basically, who are giving huge subsidies to their farmers and then leading to sort of crash of commodity prices. In the discussion also this issue in the previous session came up. You would find that continuous support from the DAC members has given a sort of rise to this kind of price volatility across developing countries. And then I tried to put together the ODA, which is going exclusively for agriculture sector, and you don't see major encouraging numbers from that. So policy coherence from that point of view is extremely important. The plight of cotton for countries is very clear to all of us. I would just quickly jump on my last slide in terms of how this goal 8 would work and in what way we can really get these asymmetries together is important. There is this talk about South-South cooperation as a model, and you would find that in most of the UNDP-led meetings, South-South cooperation is getting huge prominence. What model it brings up? And I would say that the unique feature of South-South cooperation is in terms of what Arjun Sen Gupta at some point called as development compact. And that development compact is the wide range coverage that it has in terms of trade, investment, technology, all these sectors included. So when we talk of development assistance with Nepal or Bhutan or Bangladesh and their assistance to each other, I think that development compact assumes centrality in our narrative. So when we talk of assistance, it's not just aid, but all these different dimensions that are important for South-South cooperation. I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin, for raising some of these very important issues. Let us now move to Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya. Again, he's going to deliver a lead presentation which will set the stage for further discussion on this. Thank you.
Only down here, sir.
On the screen?
No, from here. Only
No,
down here.
it goes on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Only down here.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody.
10 minutes or how many?
10 minutes to 2015? I'll try my best. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me first start by reiterating a feeling which possibly is shared by all of you, that since we are at the penultimate session of SIS 7, and we can all say that SIS 7 has broken new grounds, both in terms of getting new thoughts and also strengthening the bondages we have in the region. So I would like to congratulate RIS, its leadership, Probir particularly, notwithstanding his personal loss in the family. He had been an extraordinary example of professionalism, and really appreciate his efforts. I also think this had been an extraordinary meeting in many sense, because RIS has just got a new Director General. I cannot think of a more befitting inauguration for Sachin Chaturvedi like the SIS 7. So I also take this opportunity to congratulate Sachin, and his new leadership will obviously give us new pathways to proceed from sometimes the morass we are in sometimes. Thank you very much. I have been in many seminars in my life, and given my age, and I remember the morning sessions, who has spoken what. I remember the afternoon sessions in the but I don't remember the speakers of my pre-lunch sessions. So I don't expect that you're going to remember anything what I'm going to say now, but I will just want to insist that you remember three things what I want to say here today. The first thing is all about the post-2015, the global agenda. The second is South Asia, and the third is the upcoming Kathmandu Ministerial, and how do you link up these two, the global agenda and South Asia and Kathmandu. So this is the simple three thoughts. The paper which I have is a paper in making, has been commissioned by RIS for this particular event, but I think that this paper can go as an input to the upcoming South Asian SAARC summit coming up in Kathmandu. The paper has basically three parts. The first part, it tries to establish the benchmarks. The benchmarks in terms of two aspects. One is the global scenario in terms of the evolving concepts of the agenda, some of which has been referred to already. The second is the South Asian context in terms of the delivery of the MDGs, which will talk about that so-called unfinished agenda. So we set the benchmarks. The second part of the paper essentially goes for identification of a South Asian agenda, what it actually means for South Asia to go for post-2015. And the third part talks about its implementation aspects and the political dimensions which we have in. So this is basically the three things. Now we can all leave if you don't want to. The paper is already there. So let me go through very fast. As you all know, you have heard about the processes. Basically, two processes are coming together, one coming from the MDG, particularly 2000 Head of State Summit, and the other is Rio Plus 20. They are supposed to come together, and that process has been going on. The Open Working Group had been the linkages between the two. The Open Working Group on more than 12 sessions had got together. I have had the privilege of addressing them on number of occasions, and also the high-level political forum which has been created to give leadership to that. I have also addressed that one. And now we are waiting for the UN Secretary General synthesis report. It might be a big deal. It may not be a big deal, because many things are promised, but then it just comes out without much shock therapy. So we are all waiting for the synthesis report at this moment. The upcoming events are that we have the summit meeting coming up in September, and then it will be preceded by the financing meeting in Addis Ababa in July next 2015, and then there is this climate meeting coming up in Paris in the end of 2015. People are talking about whether the sequencing is right, because without a climate deal, can we really get an SDG deal or not? And that's why the financing meeting is being held before, because in MDGs cases, we didn't have a resource framework. It was at that time, and that was one of the major fault lines of the SDGs. Looking at the South Asian delivery, the color will speak for itself. I will not go through it. You will see the greens are on track. There are two types of green, but then the yellow are the neutral colors. Early achievers are the dark green. You will see the school part, and if you see the poverty part is good. Slow, the most of the many. The land issue is covered by forest is early achiever on average, it is good, but if you look at the laggard countries, the number of countries laggards are much more than that. So averages can be deceptive. And the drinking water access and the emission issues, we are quite fine. So you don't see much red here. It is basically green and yellow. So that's not bad. So did MDGs make any difference for South Asia? There are a lot of methodologies of trying to say that, because many would argue that South Asia or any other part of the world would have done these things anyway, with or without MDG. How do you really attribute this to MDG? This is a very critical analytical question. And there is methodologies to find that out, and the methodology is simple, that many countries may have started doing all these things quite early in their life, from 1990, Bangladesh in particular, but whether they have accelerated the process after the MDGs or not. If they have accelerated the process, then we can say at the margin that increment is attributable to the enhanced political attention given, and possibly followed by bigger allocation. Have a look at this. So the reds are deceleration, the greens are going up, and you can see the yellow in between. So Sri Lanka, supposed to be such a star performer, really did not accelerate. Please understand one point. No acceleration does not mean deceleration in their performance. So let us be clear about that. So before someone looks at me, I wanted to clarify that. So that is one other way of looking at it. You will have the full paper and you can see that how it goes in that way. Let me go on that. Building the agenda. You see, if you analyze all this the evolving concept, you will see at least there are 3-4 distinctive features. I pick up 2 distinctive features over here. The agenda is universal this time. It's not development oriented, it's for everybody. Well, what it means for everybody is another question. The number 2, it is transformative. What is transformative? We all have our pet indicators to define transformation. Third is inclusive. Inclusivity has been described at various levels. We know that. Equality issue has come up. The fourth issue is integrated, because this is holistic. This is the economic, social, and environmental. And I usually put a roof on top of that, which is governance, to build this, glue them all together. Now, if it is a transformative agenda for South Asia, what would it actually mean? For us, it will mean essentially improving the value addition, productive capacity, more sustainable income, more sustainable employment. That would be our definition, at least my definition from that. What is the challenge? Look at this table. The manufacturing sector as a share of GDP is not going up. So it is a service sector led in many ways, whether the agriculture is giving way more to services and not necessarily very high value services in many cases. It's a heterogeneous sector in many ways. So the deceleration of manufacturing is one of the major problems. Lack of decent and productive work is another major problem. You will see South Asia is having one of the largest vulnerable employment categories in the world. So we are talking about lack of sustainable income and also lack of decent work in South Asia, relative terms. And if you look at the South Asian contribution with quarter of the 25% of the global population, we end up with scientific journal articles less than 4%. So you see the disproportionate positioning in the global science, technology, and other issues. And if you look at that 4%, possibly a large part of it will be in India, not necessarily equally distributed across the region. And you look at the exports and other figures going up, but very marginal, 2%, 3%, and compare it with 25% of the population. What about inclusive? What would really mean inclusive in the South Asian dimension? If you look at the transformative part, science, technology, productive investment, and decent work over there. Here we are talking about 22% of the global poor being over here. And if you take the from $1.25 to $2, then you will see 580 million people, almost more than 500 million poor people in this region. So there is nothing to be so excited about the performance we already have. And if you look at the global distribution, you will see that in among the top 5 countries with the largest number of poor, 2 of them are in South Asia, India and Bangladesh. So it is really not a very comforting picture when it comes to the the poverty situation as you see. And estimates of proportion of poor living in South Asia, it is still almost a quarter. And if you look at the rest of the world, other than Southeast and the Central Africa, where it is 41%, nowhere in the world has such a concentration of poor people at this moment, notwithstanding the slowdown. Now, if you look also the inequality issue of the various dimensions, this time around there was an agreement that we'll look into the inequality. In fact, two words went around very fast. One is that we need equality, another is we need quality. And quality and inequality are the two, the hyped up word or the punchlines for SDGs in many ways. But you see the inequality is growing. They look at the Gini coefficient as it goes, and if you look at the Human Development Index on the gender part, we have, notwithstanding all our successes, you look at the indicators coming from UNDP, that the gender-related coefficient is still very low in comparison to the rest of the region. So we may be applauding ourselves about all other things, but we have done spectacular in the area of women's rights. But if you put it into a comparative perspective, it looks quite pale. This is also about the vulnerability of the women's employment, the number of the vulnerable, it's a double jeopardy. It is not only bad, non-decent work, but it is the non-decent work disproportionately concentrating for women employment, as you can see. I come to the third part of it is building an agenda is, of course, the one is the productive capacity and employment. The other is, of course, the inclusive part, making it a much more equal and less discriminatory society. And for that, we are talking about accountability and voice. So there are some data on accountability and voice. And if you look at them, that in many cases, the voice and accountability is not increasing, notwithstanding all the practicing democracies what we are. So there's something, I don't have time to go through it, but as you can see that the strongest would have been 2.5, and you can see only we see in India it is in a positive number, and the rest are negative. Not to say they have crossed the point. And many cases it is increasing in terms of the lack of voice. Political stability and absence of violence and terrorism, and here also the ranking is such, doesn't excite you very much, because out of 162 countries, 161th is of course Afghanistan as it stands, as you can see. And the most stable one, as you can see, is 16 is Bhutan, followed by Nepal, notwithstanding the fact they don't have their constitution as yet for quite some time. So as you can see that. Let me come to now that having established the benchmark and the challenges which we have, I'm concluding this is the core of it. What I do here is that compare the post-2015 agenda with the SARC development agenda, which was adopted in 2007 and then was given life up to 2012, and as you know, it has been given life up to 2015. So how does the SARC agenda compares with the new one, which is coming up now in 2014, after almost 5-7 years after? So how does it compares like that? The full overlap is 18%, partial overlap 35%, equivalent almost 30%. New things which are not there is 18%. If I put them side by side and see, here on the health part, the SARC development agenda doesn't have much, you see. There is nothing in the health issues. Why SARC development agenda did not consider health issues? I'm a bit surprised on that. Look at promote sustainable, inclusive, sustainable economic growth. SARC agenda does not talk about that inclusive growth at all. I'm just giving an example. Consumption and production patterns, I think, well, it is more for the northern countries, but still it was somehow not mentioned over. The others are coming together. The last one is the means of implementation. That's a new thing which are coming. So if you look at the new SDGs, the so-called 17 goals and 169 targets, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, on 6 occasions they have referred to regional cooperation. On 6 occasions. And these are the cases where they have referred to the regional cooperation. One, proper growth, gender-sensitive growth, genetic diversity of seeds, quality of infrastructure, urban, peri-urban urbanization issue, regional cooperation for science technology, and full implementation of international law for sustainable use of oceans. These are the 6 cases where regional cooperation has been mentioned as we go. I have tried to find out some means of implementation which already exist, but not necessarily in full force being implemented to take the SARC agenda forward. and I have to gone through all this plethora of targets and try to zero in into the minimum type of agenda what one can think of. You see, the high-level panel report gave a very powerful sentence which said, leave no one behind. And when they say leave no one behind, they mean not only countries, but specific communities within the countries. And the point what they were making is that, and which is much more powerful, if I often forget, that no goals will be considered to be implemented if at least a part of the society remains outside that. So it means the whole society has to be a full beneficiary of that. So from that particular point of view, I have picked up 4 issues as a SAARC agenda, leaving no one behind in South Asia. So these are minimum what we would like to see. First is the issue of poverty, inequality, discrimination. So this is number 1. It is number 2, productive capacity, employment, decent job, and etc. Third, adverse impact of climate, and then a peaceful, inclusive society with more accountability and voices. These are the 4 critical points I make. And you can see that it are coming from the 4 different dimensions. One is economic, one is social, one is environment, another is governance. So these 4 dimensions have been captured over here. My last point is that the 18th SAARC summit is coming up, and I hope and pray that they seriously addresses this issue, because 2015 has been the extended timeline of the SAARC agenda. The gaps are very well understood. We will see how our leaders are going to contemplate on that. Will it be once again rhetorics, or it will be supported by real efforts with political initiative and others? If you go back, the causes of failure of the earlier ones, I have identified here 4. One is lack of political commitment, which essentially means not giving attaching priorities to it. Heterogeneity of the region, varying priorities, that is a real problem. Resource constraint, we don't have much, and obviously there is trust deficit. At least the good meeting in Kathmandu will overcome some of these. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Deb, for delivering such a scintillating, very comprehensive perspective from South Asia on this discussion on post-2015 development agenda. Only you could do it, and I expected nothing less from you, Deb. Knowing. Now, let me turn to the... Sorry? No one would have expected anything less. Of course. So, so let me turn to our panelists, and let me remind, and Pradeep told this to me before we started, that panelists are panelists and not presenters. And so we will let us keep that in mind. In any case, we are short of time, running out of time. So if I could request the panelists to limit their remarks to just 5 minutes, so that we can have few minutes of discussion from the floor, if at all possible. So, and let me invite, Mr. Tanmelal, Joint Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, to make his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I find that I'm the only one representing the A government here at this panel. So maybe I'll try and speak briefly about the ongoing negotiations since the development agenda, the SDGs, all these, the climate change issues are still under negotiations between the governments. For this, perhaps it may be useful for me to recapitulate some of the history of these deliberations to see where various groups of countries may be coming from. As we know that next year United Nations will be celebrating its 70th anniversary. When the United Nations was created in 70 years ago, the focus was, at the end of the war, a rapid economic growth, basically in the West Europe, which had suffered a lot of damage. At that time, it was thought that rapid industrial growth through science and technology and capital was the solution. At that time, of course, a very large number of countries were still not independent. As we came to 60s and most of the countries got independence from various colonial powers, It also coincided with the time when the industrial and economic recovery in the West had taken place. It had stabilized. And after that, you had seen the rise of environment protection movements against pollution and all that, which was beginning to affect the West European societies. However, the priorities of the developing countries were quite different, rightly so. They thought that to emerge from their condition, they had to rapidly undertake economic growth. For which they lacked resources. There was a historical context to it. So these two trends came together at that time. How to balance, or how to get a collective global priority going, which can balance the issues of economic growth and sustainability. Of course, sustainability word came much later in mid-1980s as sort of a compromise. There was even debate on what sustainability could constitute. There were issues of whether it would be intra-generational equity or intergenerational, and how can we define needs of a particular generation which has not yet arrived, for which technology and energy resources are not known. So it was a very sophisticated debate even at that time, and it gradually got linked to the debate on climate change issues, which really started around the same time. 1987 was the Montreal Protocol on ozone depleting substances, and 1992 you had the UNFCCC. So this is, I wanted to bring out this linkage and brief history so that it helps us put in perspective that this is nothing new, this debate. And when we really speak about development issues at an international level, then what are we saying? We obviously are saying that we have to define certain priorities, global priorities, because the issues are interlinked. Energy, water, food, industry, agriculture, all these cross-cutting issues, one can understand the linkages between them, and also that countries may have to really collaborate if we want to find sustainable solutions to these problems. So at one level, as other speakers have said, these are national issues. Action has to be taken nationally. But also, how does the international climate help or hinder the achievement of these priorities? That is where the international negotiations come in. Now, presently, as we know that a set of sustainable development goals, which are considered to be in some ways successor to MDGs, are being negotiated. An open working group has proposed some set of goals. It is not yet final. However, this is not a isolated topic. It is very closely linked to what happens in climate change. It also has to see how the global community will collaborate on providing funding or removing challenges, removing barriers to trade, how they will collaborate to provide appropriate financing to vulnerable countries, those who lack the resources to do so. So these are some of the issues that come into negotiations when we are looking at it at the global level. We are discussing South Asia here, and as you have mentioned, by sheer numbers of our people, we stand out in this global debate, not only because of numbers, but in terms of the extent of poverty, which is still remaining. In the past few years, there has been a lot of progress achieved by various countries in our region in lifting people out of poverty line, but still the numbers are huge, which recent UN estimates point out. Out of 1.2 billion absolute poverty, absolute poor people, 300 to 400 million could be thought to be living here. These people need to be provided access to water, to food, to energy, to mobility, to transport, connectivity, education, employment, healthcare, all these things. And the governments really have their task cut out on these issues. So whatever happens here will determine whether the world as a whole makes progress on these issues. Now this debate, while it defines the priorities and it provides an opportunity to assess progress, what has happened, we have to really see whether it's a constructive and collaborative concept emerging. What is the intention of the global community? Or it is to be seen or to be used in certain contexts through a process of naming and shaming to put pressure on countries for various reasons, which sometimes can help, but sometimes can have other motives. Or are we really looking at achieving some sort of a genuine facilitative international environment? So these are all issues up for debate. It remains to be seen how collectively wise the international community will be in trying to come to terms with the challenges that the global community faces presently, be it in terms of still unrepresentative nature of various institutions, be it in financial architecture. You mentioned BRICS Bank, which has to be seen in that context of how the Bretton Woods institutions are governed, the UN Security Council, how the historical commitments made by various groups of countries on ODA seem to have materialized or not materialized so far, how this agenda could be let's say deflected to other issues of private investment, for which there are national frameworks already existing, or how to treat South-South cooperation, whether it should be brought into this debate, how should it be governed, whether there should be uniform standards, why should there be uniform standards, what could be the reasoning for that, because the motives of South-South cooperation are completely different. It has to be seen in a historical solidarity context. So there are quite a number of issues, and there are no simple answers to these, and we have as negotiators our task cut out over the next 1 year on various streams of negotiations, and hopefully we will have a satisfactory, if at least to some sections, solution that helps in taking the world on a more sustainable and equitable path. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lal, for giving us a very interesting perspective, especially highlighting the spirit of global partnership that is needed to really get this agenda moving and working. Let me turn to another of representative from one of the South Asian governments, that's Mr. Ravi Shankar Senju, is from National Planning Commission of Nepal. So, Senju, you.
First of all, I would like to thank RIS and Mr. Dr. Nagesh for providing me this floor to say something in this post-development agenda. Especially after Professor Chaturvedi's presentations and analytical presentation of Dr. Bhattacharya, and even remark of Tanmay Lal, actually there is little room left for me to add in these issues. So I will say something on this. The overarching challenge for post-2015 agenda for this region is definitely addressing the unfinished agenda of MDG, balanced integration of economic and social and environmental dimensions of sustainable development, and mainstreaming 17 goals and 169 targets of MDG. South Asian region is still a home to a high proportion of people living in deprivation. Some of the key issues facing by these South Asian countries are decline in extreme poverty, but still large number of people living just above the extreme poverty line, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, high deprivation in access to the basic services, low social protection expenditure, high inequality of income, opportunity and power linked with the disparities in access to productive assets and basic services, as well as discriminatory policies and regulations. Insufficient, decent and productive employment and high concentration of employment in the informal sector. High youth unemployment, resources intensive growth, gender inequality is prerequisite for realization of all these development goals. High gender gap in labor force participation, 49.5% in South Asia. Widespread violence against women and girls, manifesting in multiple forms of sexual, physical, domestic, economic, psychological and harmful practices, and resulting in disability and death. And South Asia is also world's one of the most disaster-prone region. Frequency of extreme weather even increased due to the climate changes. Development outlook vulnerable to the economic and environmental shock is there. Increase and rapid urbanization and cities, growing urban population, and millions of people not having adequate urban facilities. In this scenario, Asian countries should focus on eradicating the poverty and hunger, pursuing higher inclusive and sustained economic growth for productive job creations, women's empowerment and gender equality in the context of violence and inadequate access to the health care, building resilience to the disaster, develop surface transport network and facilitate sub-region transit and trade. So, implementing this post-development agenda in South Asia should focus on in financing investment need in physical infrastructure, human capital and sustainable development. Option for raising required resources includes use of region's high foreign exchange reserves and saving, strengthen tax revenue, because most of countries in this region tax amounting far less than 25% of the GDP. Involve the private sector, capital markets and public-private partnership, and enhance South-South triangular and regional cooperation. In science and technology and innovations, use STI to understand the key global challenges, draw solution and apply a more favorable looking analysis, support the development of ICT to strengthen transparency, participation and share knowledge between the countries. In trade, establish a multilateral trade regime that is fair, just, open. DFQF provision need to be further strengthened. Lower trade cost, especially with regards to the non-tariff cost. Promote green trade between the aid for trade, foreign direct investment, technology transfer and trade finance funding. When implementing the trade reforms, bear in mind that the social and environmental dimension of the sustainable development. In capacity building, support evidence-based, multi-dimensional, long-term and participatory decision-making at all levels. Enhance the statistical capacity of the LDC and strong monitoring and post-2015 development agenda must to be underpinned by the robust monitoring and accountability mechanism, evaluation system. Rely on cultural heritage and education as a driver of community development and transformative vision of the education and learning as well as job qualification, curriculum development and programs. In governance, for transformation toward a sustainable development, call for more accountable, transparent and effective institutions. Enhance the importance of effective policy coordination mechanism to synergize the objective. For example, with respect to economic diversification and social inclusiveness, support institutional reforms to create enable environment for increased private sector participation. In conclusion, the simplicity of the MDG was an important strength, and it is an unfinished agenda for South Asia. That momentum must be maintained. Time-bound prioritization of the goals, sub-goals are necessary, as well as goals cannot be achieved. And in the same, due to technological and resources capacity, there is need to promote new partnership for implementing the new development agenda, including the private sector. The growing impact of climate change in this region, especially in the Himalayan region, must to be addressed critically. Zero carbon concept need to be mainstream in this respect. Like MDG, the social dimension of the new agenda is much more important than the economic one. Water management is going to be a regional issue in coming years, so cross-border water management should be an indicator. Financial inclusion and financial literacy need to be addressed properly while developing implementation mechanism. The access, opportunity, capability and safety for the income and expenditure shock issue for the vulnerable group need to be addressed properly. There is need for South Asian countries to avail of the three flexibilities and to review the role of the intellectual property rights at the global level. It is critical to mainstream access to the technology throughout the goals. Targets on access to technology should be measurable and clearly define roles and responsibilities. Post-2015 development agenda must be underpinned by the robust monitoring and accountability mechanism all level, global, national and local level. Action plan and framework for localization of 2015 development agenda must be developed and implemented as it is necessary to mainstream these goals as a way of life of common people who actually benefit from it. Overall, we South Asians must work hard to make South Asia first in achieving this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabiji, for re-emphasizing the importance of the productive job creation, and I think that's coming out as a overriding, very important issue for South Asia and the importance of global partnership for that. Now, let me turn to Dr. Alia Khan, Dean Quaid-e-Azam University, to give her perspective.
I wish to. It's not working. Okay, I wish to thank the Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Pakistan and RIS in New Delhi for giving me a chance to be included in this very thought-provoking process for South Asia. I want to make it clear, I am certainly not a member of the group of the eminent persons sitting on this panel. Whatever I say, I will say as part of reflections of an academic. It's a personal journey, and I am going to focus more on the social sector because that is where I believe my strength as an academic lies in terms of both teaching, research and whatever experience I have in working with the government and with international organizations. It was January 2004, about 10 years ago, when the SAARC Social Charter was signed in Islamabad at the 12th SAARC Summit. And when I read in the agenda that I had to give some input on this panel, the first thought that came to my mind was, what happened to the SAARC Social Charter? And thank you, Aisha, from the Pakistan High Commission for providing me with a document so that I could go through and relive the feeling that all of us had upon reading that document. And the MDGs had been committed to before that, and after reading the SAARC Social Charter, we felt that achieving the MDGs would probably not be a difficult task. But as it turns out, and as you've seen in Dr. Bhattacharya's presentation, Pakistan is a laggard country in many of the social MDGs. So what lesson do we learn from there? We did not form the National Plan of Action to implement the SAARC Social Charter. There was no, if I can say that, there was no powerful accountability at the SAARC level to sort of take to task nation states for not making the national plans and aligning their national policies with the SAARC Social Charter. If that had happened, I firmly believe that we would not see the dismal picture on the accomplishments on the MDG front. And now we are moving after the MDGs to the SDGs. So just want to say that we need to remind ourselves that it's our national policies. Had Pakistan implemented its education policy, its health policy, its women development policy at the national level, we would not have done so badly on the MDG front. So now we have yet other dimensions in terms of SDGs. You know, we have to take care of the economy as well as the environment in terms of fulfilling the SDGs. And if you read the SARC Social Charter, it covers almost all the goals that are now reworded in the SDG agenda. So that's one point I want to make. The other point I want to make is that in a recent report, Stiglitz and Sen have said that what we measure affects what we do, and that really went to my heart, because I think our data gathering systems at the national level and our data analysis capacities at, say, the SARC level, at the South Asian level, need much more strengthening. I am part of the SARC gender database project, and it's a small drop in the ocean as far as the whole gamut of what SARC is supposed to achieve is concerned. But even there we have big problems in compiling and collating and analyzing data from across the SARC countries. So we need to take the data challenge very seriously. The last point that I want to make is about knowledge transfer. I think we are so rich in terms of the South Asian knowledge base that can help us in attaining any type of goals, whether nationally or whether at the SARC level, SARC development goals or sustainable development goals. And being a labor economist, I would just say that there is immense amount of knowledge relating to the employment linkages with trade. We have been talking endlessly about how to make SAFTA more dynamic and more workable for the benefit of the South Asian people, and the linkage goes through the labor markets. So what can we learn about better functioning of labor markets in terms of opening up borders for trade, because it is through the labor markets that the trade is going to happen. And I picked up a book yesterday at the Oxford University bookstall, Skilling India, and I picked it up because that is one area in which Pakistan has been struggling, with its technical and vocational education and training systems. And if an initiative like the one described in the book by Santosh Mehrotra, I happen to know him, and it's a very good book. I invite people who are interested to really take it seriously. If we can learn on how to develop skills for trade in the South Asian region, I think we would, feel very good about it. Another issue is of increasing the female labor force participation rate. With an FLFPR of 25%, Pakistan cannot hope to engage dynamically via SAFTA or via any other agreement on paper. We have to get more women in the labor force and in the manufacturing sector, and if they are working in agriculture, they have to be recognized. Also, this is important from the decent work perspective and labor standards. I am a member of the Punjab Minimum Wage Board, and I often think that wouldn't it be nice if I could study the minimum wage implementation systems of the South Asian countries and learn how to implement minimum wages better in Pakistan and give suggestions. I think these are some practical things that we need to do. Also, just recently, I happened to present to one of the people who are giving a dharna in Islamabad in terms of advocacy. The Indian bill on social security for street vendors and hawkers, which I think is a very landmark legislation, and we need, in terms of taking the labor market impacts, I think this is the kind of knowledge transfer that needs to flow through the South Asian countries in order for SAARC to become viable in terms of making people the center of development in South Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khan, especially for highlighting the importance of SAARC Charter, SAARC Social Charter, and also the importance of another aspect of regional cooperation that we often do not pay enough importance to, which is sharing of good practices, development experiences across the countries in the South. We are living in a very similar kind of milieu, and we can benefit from each other's lessons and good practices. Now I turn to the last of our panelists, Dr. Manmohan Agarwal, and I hope that he would be very brief because we have literally run out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The previous panelists have mentioned how South Asia is lagging behind in the social sectors in progress towards the MDG goals. I would just like to add 2 points to that. One is that South Asia region has the worst record on the social sectors apart from Sub-Saharan Africa. So we have done very poorly, and that despite a very high rate of growth. So we have been the least successful in transforming economic growth into social progress. Now, going forward, what it means is that we need to reverse the slowdown in growth that has occurred in South Asia since 2008, and this slowdown is much greater than in the other regions, and to ensure that this growth is social friendly. Now, what is the nature of the growth, and why has it been so unfriendly towards social progress? One aspect is that productivity in agriculture has grown very slowly in South Asia. For instance, work by the US Department of Agriculture and by IFPRI shows that out of 50 or 60 countries that they studied, India was in the bottom third of the countries in terms of increases in agricultural productivity. And we know that agricultural productivity, particularly of smallholders, is very important for social progress. The second aspect, which is very important, is that our growth has not been very great at generating employment. If one looks at cross-sector analysis of about 109 countries that we did, we found that much greater amount of employment was being retained in the agricultural sector in South Asia than in other regions. So the growth in the non-agricultural sector was not able to attract or provide jobs for people to migrate out of agriculture, which was the classic way in which economic development was supposed to take place. Now, what needs to be done going forward in order to rectify these problems? Now, we know that the countries in the developed world are going to be growing slowly for the foreseeable future. So they're not going to be able to provide markets for the exports of the region. And these exports have been very important in propelling growth in the region. For instance, if you look at India, exports of goods tripled in about 15 years towards the 1990s to the almost just before the crisis. Exports of non-factor services quadrupled, and exports of factor services, basically remittances, quintupled. So exports had a tremendous role to play in what is going on in the economic area, and we cannot expect the same to continue in the future. Faced with that situation, we have two options really. One is to have domestic demand-based growth, and the other is to have trade-based growth, but trade on a regional basis. Each of it has its own drawbacks and requirements for policy. For instance, if you want to have domestic-based growth, then obviously you need to transform purchasing power to the poor so they can generate the demand which will lead to growth in the manufacturing sector. But broadly speaking, whether you go in for regional trade-driven growth or domestic demand-driven growth, what is very essential is that we need to generate higher productivity growth in agriculture so that domestic demand or demand across the region is generated and can provide a market for the manufacturing sector. This would require tremendous emphasis on technology. We need innovations in agricultural technology, just as the region had innovations in the late 60s and 70s through the Green Revolution. So we need much greater cooperation among the agricultural research institutes in the region in order to get broad-based innovation in agriculture which can drive forward the growth process. Now the other thing that can happen is that because of the crisis, investment and savings levels in the region have declined. If we are going to have faster growth, this decline in savings and investment has to be reversed. Now obviously each individual country government can take policy measures to improve the environment of savings and investment. But this can also be done on a regional basis through greater cooperation in the financial field. All the countries in the region practically, at least the larger ones, have quite vibrant stock exchanges and bond markets. Why don't we have consistent regulatory frameworks on affecting these sectors so that you can have a larger set of savings to draw on for investment in any particular country? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I think between our 6 speakers in this panel, we have got a very rich set of menus and all the different aspects of South Asian challenge as they grapple with the huge problems of poverty reduction, job creation, and they are incidentally linked, and the action at the national levels and cooperation from the global community. We have heard all different aspects, but we really have run out of time, but maybe 5 minutes we can spend. So let us have a few questions, and then we will conclude and break for lunch. So I see Saman's hand, then Excellency at the end. If there are no others, then I will just confine to
Yes, thanks for very good presentations. I would like to take this point that Alia Khan made about the SAC social charter and relate it to the areas they've emphasized, the SAC development goals and governance and accountability issues. Now, after the SAC social charter was formed, SACEPs came up with the Citizens Charter, South Asia Citizen Charter, and thereafter national citizens charters were produced by individual countries with a monitoring mechanism in place to hold governments accountable for implementing the social charter. Unfortunately, due to the dialogue between the government and the civil society being not adequate, the civil society could not keep the governments accountable for implementation. This is just a comment.
Excellency at the back, and then Dr. Shilkant Sharma.
Thank you. Dr. Nagendra Kumar, I just want to seek a small clarification. I think you've said that the South Asia has some 40% of the world's poor, or some other people said 44% of the world's people reside in South Asia. And in this regard, I am just wondering, the future, the report which Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya mentioned, the future we want, is it an agreed document or input to the post-2015 MDG agenda? Is it an agreed position of the SAARC countries? And if it is so, is it going to be presented to this 18th SAARC summit to receive their blessing? Or are we going to put it through ESCAP, so that the ESCAP could put forward the positions of the most poor countries of the SAARC regions to the United Nations agenda? I know as far as Bhutan is concerned, they held an international experts conference meeting in Thimphu last year, and I was told that they have already prepared the report and even forwarded to the United Nations. I am not quite sure whether it has been routed through the SAARC or through ESCAP. And I gather that some time ago I heard that the Bangladesh has also prepared a separate report. Probably so did Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Are we going to amalgamate all these reports together and submit it either through the SAARC as a SAARC position or through ESCAP?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Shilkant Sharma.
I think I just wanted to add to this valid point made by Alia Khan from Pakistan and what Saman said, that actually in SAARC official context, this cabinet secretaries meetings have been started over the last 4 years or 5 years. They met, I think, twice or thrice. But that meeting is really, if you were to see its record, is really uplifting, because those people come not from diplomacy, they are not from the usual suspects, and they share actual experience about how do you deal with street children, how do you deal with employment generation, and it's like brothers and cousins from abroad coming together on the fireside, which is what actually is the métier of South Asia. We all suffer from the same problems. And these meetings, I've attended some of them, they were very, very uplifting, because they talked about their experiences. And there has been actually one attempt in the past in SAARC to bring out success stories, as you mentioned, Nagesh. There was one booklet, I think middle of last decade, where from Nepal, from Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh, from India, Pakistan, there have been some cases where some very marginal little attempt has been made. I think it's time that we should look at those things again. Thank you.
No, thank you, Dr. Sharma, for pointing this out. I think this process is continuing, which you described. In fact, last October, there was a meeting at the SAARC summit, SAARC Secretariat, where the good practices from different countries were discussed on poverty reduction and all that. So SAARC poverty profile, I think, which started in your time, is continuing at a slower pace, but we need to push it. So I think the time has come to wind up this session, and I am sure that everyone will agree that we have had a very rich set of menus or agendas put on the table by all our 6 speakers, and enriched further by some of you from the audience. I don't think it is appropriate for me to try to summarize it when we are actually just waiting for breaking for lunch. But just to say, and Excellency, your point, the discussion is actually on, nothing is agreed as yet, as Tanmay was saying. And I just want to first ask if any one of the panelists or speakers want to respond to any of the questions. Otherwise, we can just conclude quickly.
I think the point is that the thoughts which have been generated here, how do you really feed into the official process? Because the experience of the SASEP Citizens Charter will be quite instructive on that way. So what is important is that RIS as the organizers, I hope will prepare a brief for the ministerial meeting and pass it on, and hopefully that will be shared with the partner organizations before sending out. So we create a bit of an avenue on that. Thank you.
Very important point. I think Sachin has taken note of. Any other, anybody who wants to raise anything? Okay. Well, in that case, I think I just like to say that we have had a very rich discussion. What comes out is that we have enormous development challenge in South Asia, poverty being one, and then you begin to enlarge the list, you will find many such issues, health issues, environmental considerations and all that. And in the context of youth bulge that South Asia is going through, the most important priority for South Asia is to have productive job creation, for which you need employment creating growth. And while the development agenda is primary responsibility of national governments, the global development partnership has to play a supportive role, provide a good external context for pursuing these development policy, where governments are sort of enabled and empowered and facilitated to create productive jobs through employment creating growth, and in particular by providing technology, finance, market access and all others. And the South-South and regional cooperation has a very important place as a supplement and complement this global development partnership, in particular in addressing the common issues, common challenges through joint research, joint development and cooperation, including through sharing good practices, as our friend Dr. Alia Khan was pointing out, sharing our development experiences, how each of these countries are dealing with certain issues, and SAC Secretariat can provide a very useful platform for doing that. So can other regional agencies, including ESCAP. So I think so we have a very rich discussion and very heavy pressing agenda of development for us, all the people of this region and the governments of this region and the global community at large. So on that note, I would like to invite you to join me in thanking our 6 speakers very profusely.